This is a presentation from the Waupaca Historical Society.
Hello. We're the Jenswell family. We're not a circus act, although it might sound like it. How many of you were at our last presentation? It was back in 2019. Of course you were. But back before COVID, we kind of got sidetracked with COVID, but we're back now. Who was there? 2019? Okay. We're doing it a little bit different this year. I did most of the talking last time, and I kind of bored everybody, so we're mixing it up with different speakers. A couple of things. We are focusing on the history, as you can see with the title, back when the Hildegards owned it, but we're also going to be talking about the current park, what's going on there, and what some ideas are for the future. So my sister Jan, my brother Joel, and I had written this book, and we talked about the history of the park. The book is for sale back there if anybody's interested, and I can hawk it without shame because we're not making any money on this deal. Actually, it's costing us money, but we're okay with that. And any proceeds from that go to the Historical Society. So if you want a book, we got a bunch of them back there. Please help yourself. They're $20. We're also, at the end of the whole program, we're doing a drawing for 5 free books. And it includes a book of ours from Whispering Pines and also one from the Friends of Hartman Creek on the Helgeson House. It's kind of a package deal. So we're doing that. We also have a couple or 3 coffee mugs that were donated by the Friends of Hartman Creek.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
If you didn't happen to put your name in the basket and you'd like to, we'll give you a moment before we do the actual drawing and ask you to do that. Yeah, ask for the
Can everybody hear me? Oh, can you hear me okay? Okay. Because I could put this on, but then it gets real complicated with me and technological devices, so I got one already, and we'll stick with that. Okay, if you can't hear, just let me know and I'll talk louder. We're no experts on Whispering Pines. We know a little bit about it. Our family grew up on Marl Lake. We were friends of the Hildegards. We knew them. Our grandparents knew them. Some of us worked there for a while. I worked there in '63 and '64. My brother Joel worked there in '68. Jan helped out in a number of different capacities, which we'll talk about a little bit later. At the ripe old age of, 10 and 11, you had some pretty important jobs there. But anyway, what this program is, what I want to get out of this program is more of a dialogue than a lecture, because I want to hear from you folks about your memories, your experiences, your thoughts about it. We can give you ours, but I want to learn more from you folks too about what you remember about it, because it was such a unique place, such a unique situation that you don't see much anymore in terms of how it evolved and how it operated for all those years. There's a wagon out there that has been restored. It was from Taddywawa originally, but then later it was from Whispering Pines. It wasn't one of those down by the lake that you've seen in pictures and postcards, but it's a cousin of one of those. If you're interested in having your picture taken in it like they used to do in the old days, those were probably arguably the most photographed things at the park that people took pictures of themselves in over the years. So anyway, that is there. It's been restored by Fred Silaway as kind of the mover and shaker, and his wife Ann behind that as is the Historical Society. What else am I forgetting? Oh, I know. This is kind of a hang-up I've got that I've got to talk about a little bit. I'm having dental work done, and I'm a little self-conscious about my teeth. So I know I look like a bad carved pumpkin, and maybe a refugee from an Arkansas meth lab, but I'm really not. And I can say that I have no love for meth labs, but I have nothing against Arkansas, but my brother Joel has a place in Arkansas. I don't think it's a meth lab, I think it's a fishing camp, but that's what he says. So. Anyway, we want to thank you for coming. We hope it's interesting for you. It shouldn't get too hot in here because luckily the humidity is down today and it's a little more livable than it has been for a few days. Anything you guys want to add before we get into the history stuff? Okay. We're starting with the entrance of the park. That's the original entrance to the park. All the signs were hand lettered pretty much by Hildegard or some help that he had. Chris Hildegard was born in 1887 in Denmark, and he came over here at the age of 19. And he settled in Chicago, and he started working for Borden's Dairy as a wagon washer. And he worked his way up through the ranks to the point where he and two other guys in 1914 started their own milk company in Chicago called Borgen's, which I think was probably intentionally named that way because there was a lot of confusion between Borden's and Borgen's. And there were stories about the Borgen's wagons going down the street ahead of the Borden's wagons to sell milk, but either way, it was a very successful business. He met Emma Gibson, who had lived she was born in 1888. He met her in Chicago. She was a secretary there at the time, and they got married. And he worked in Chicago and was very successful, and I think it was around 1914 was when he started Borgen's, and in 1929 he sold out to Borden's. And I think Borden's was just sick of the competition, and apparently they made a lot of money on that. And I don't know how much, that's never been really revealed, but there has been some speculation it could have been even $1 million back in those days. The significant thing was it was just before the Great Depression. So it was perfect timing. So they got out of that with quite a bit of money. He was part of a group of investors out of the Chicago area called the Barrington Group, or the Barrington Club. And they invested in a lot of land around the upper chain of lakes, specifically from Beasley Creek, where the miniature golf place is, all the way out to Rural Road. All that frontage was owned by the Barrington Group, as were other tracts. But this was developed as Shea-Pecomio Park, which was Menominee for something having to do with the chain of lakes. It's something about stretching waters and things like that, but it was a subdivision. And our family, I came up here in 1952 with my grandma and two cousins. I was 2 years old at the time. I didn't have any clue where I was or what I was doing, but it was neat. And we rented the cottage there, Oak Lane, which is now owned by our very nice neighbor. Her. we still get along. But anyway, in 1957, our other grandparents bought a cottage that was next door to Oak Lane, and the family kind of has that cottage, and it's been in the family ever since 1957. We're celebrating our 65th year on the lake this year as a family party, and it's gone from our grandparents to our parents to us now, basically, and now to this next generation. So anyway, we've been around for quite a while. We actually started coming up here because our uncle, Og Vandermeulen, was a teacher and a basketball coach at Waupaca High School in the late 1930s. And he knew of the Hildegards, and he's the one that got our grandma, his mother-in-law, set up with the cottage at Oak Lane. So that's how we got here. I think I'm done babbling about that. So anyway, they moved up here. They took out a tract of land of 15 acres, which was the original Whispering Pines Park tract. And it ran from Whispering Pines Road all the way to the channel between Pope and Marl Lake, and covered that waterfront in there, and pretty much all of the eastern side of Marl Lake at one time. And he ended up buying up a lot of those properties from his partners, and he ended up owning most of those properties at one point. I don't think he ever owned ours, but he owned a lot of them. Anyway, they started the retirement in 1929, and they started developing the land. It was just wild land there. And they started clearing the brush and just sort of clearing things out. In 1934, maybe, they built the house. No, 1932, I think they finally built the house. And it was ahead of its time. It had electricity and plumbing and everything else in those days. And they moved up here, I think, in 34. But they lived in Chicago and came back and forth during the summer, and then finally ended up moving here. But during that time, she developed the land. Her big thing were the flowers. And that's where all the begonias and all the flowers that ended up coming from was Emma's love for those. Chris did an awful lot of stuff. He loved nature, he loved people, and he basically opened his front yard up to the world. It was their private place, but everybody was welcome to come and visit, and every year they added things. It started out with the Arbor, which was a rock garden that went from the top of the hill down to Marl Lake, kind of to the east side of where that stone walkway is now. And they had rock formations and a lot of flowers and stuff in there. It expanded both east, west, and north with other things over the years. They put in walkways, they put in flower beds, they put in a lot of things that had to do with the natural area and keeping it natural. But as time progressed, more people came. I think it was in what do we got there? Yeah, by 1936, they already had almost 13,000 people coming through there. And that was a lot then. And you can see how it expanded. By 39, they had 26,000. By the mid-50s, they had almost 100,000 people coming in there in the summer, which is incredible when you think about a crowd that size coming into that area. But anyway, they started out with their house and their yard, basically, a 15-acre yard that they kept developing. People were saying, well, there's so many of us, we'd love to have something to eat or drink. So they set up a coffee shop. They built a stone coffee shop there, kind of back to the northwest of it was the southwest of their place. And they started serving coffee and pie and milk. Then people were saying, well, we'd like to have some souvenirs, something to remember this place by. And what was also happening, they were collecting a lot of stone formations and a lot of weird things like wood formations, and they started losing them. People would take stuff as souvenirs. So they thought, okay, we'll set up a souvenir shop. So they built a souvenir shop and turned that into a pretty, over the years, it kind of expanded into a fairly sizable building with a lot of interesting souvenirs, I guess is the best way to put it. You want to make a comment on that? Because you got some ground.
Well, I worked the souvenir shop, sort of, meaning I sat next to my grandmother and checked people out sometimes. And we had great souvenirs, really nice moccasins, Minnetonka, lots of postcards, a lot of ashtrays with kind of vulgar writing on them. Do I want to tell them about this?
Yeah, go ahead. It's an adult crowd.
Rubber doll that you could press its stomach and its little bathing suit top would pop down. And I was just a kid, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot be looking at these or touching these. What's my grandma thinking? I don't remember if we sold many of those. One thing I would like to mention is I was honored with the job of doing the inventory one summer, which took me probably about 60 hours.
Were you 10?
10 or 11, yeah.
Wow.
And typing on an old typewriter. Yeah, why would they trust me? But at the end of all this, they paid me with the white horse statue that's back on the table, which I'd been lusting over all summer, but it cost $5, and, couldn't do it. So that was my pride and joy.
And you've kept it all those years.
I did.
Yeah, so there was a lot of weird stuff. So they put the souvenir shop together. And then as you can see through the progression here, and you have one of these in your handouts too, as well as a map of the park as best as I could draw it from memory. But things kept expanding and expanding and expanding. So they decided that the little stone coffee shop wasn't enough. So they needed a bigger and better refreshment stand. They called it the Hut. And out of that, they sold hamburgers, hot dogs, and some interesting concoction called Sloppy Joes. And nobody knows quite what was in that recipe. And people either loved it or hated it. No, it definitely wasn't manwich. It was something else. But anyway, that was booming. And they sold ice cream, a lot of soda, things like that. The souvenir business kept expanding, and they put the annex in, which was a souvenir shop down by the playground. As you don't have the map up there, but you can check your map in your handout. So they had 2 souvenir shops, 2 refreshment stands, a large playground going on, and then they had the lake shore. They developed the lake shore where they had a nice pier down there, and they had a walkway where the covered wagons, the bigger covered wagons were. As you go down the stairway to the left, those were where the covered wagons were. Then you went to the right, and you had a wishing well, and which local kids kept trying to see if somebody could find quarters in there and stuff. And then they had a little mill with miniature dwarfs in there working this mill, and then they had a gazebo down there. So the lakefront was pretty developed too. And they'd also put, yeah.
If you look at the map, what's not evident on here is where the hill is leading down to the lake, and it would run roughly like this. And the stairway, the stone stairway that still exists there, which is the last real vestige of the original park, ran from the back of Hildegard's residence down to the pier and the boathouse, and that's right here. So if you go there today and you find that old stone staircase, there it is, and there's roughly the hill line.
And that stone staircase was built in 1932 by Chris Hildegard and Casey Nowicki, who worked for Chris back in the day in Chicago and then ended up retiring. And upon Chris's death in 1966, moved up here and kind of became the caretaker of the park. But anyway, they built that stairway in 3 weeks by hand with these huge rocks. And Casey always made the comment he lost 15 pounds in those 3 weeks. But yeah, that's still standing. The only other thing still standing at the park is the concrete slab that the hut sat on.
Oh, yeah.
That's still there, but yeah.
On the hut, don't forget about the cigar case and the candy bar case.
Oh God, yes. Yeah, they had outside candy. Well, they had outside candy bars and things on the outside, and if you open the door, a bell would ring to let people know the kids were kind of helping themselves. Plus, you remember Elsie the cow?
Oh, Elsie.
A big cow that he got from Borden somehow with Elsie on it, and Elsie's head would continue to move as you stood there. So you'd be ordering things at the window and having this cow watch you. It was different. Anyway, so I think the couple of things in terms of the progress of the development, they hit it right with the Depression. And from the time they started through the 30s into the 40s, you had the Great Depression, you had World War II, and everybody was pretty tense and pretty uptight about a lot of things. This was a real good release for people because it was free. You could come and picnic and not spend a cent except for the food you brought. If you wanted to buy souvenirs, you could. You wanted to buy a hamburger, hot dog, or a soda, you could do that. But it was a real easy, cheap, family-based entertainment for folks. And people got into that, and they really enjoyed it. So the timing was perfect for that. Plus, during the early years, forever, probably starting in the 1920s, there was a lot of marketing done in the Chicago area about the chain of lakes. And they intentionally, the developers intentionally targeted the Chicago area because of the money and all that involved down there. So you had a lot of people from Chicago coming up here, and a lot of things started opening up. So things were booming. By 1950, things were booming on the chain with a lot of different things. You had Ding's Dock and Edmunds Dock and the casino and all that. Well, even before that, you had it. But the park was really probably hit its heyday in the 50s, I'm thinking, would be my guess. Because that's when a lot of stuff started developing. You know, the refreshment stands were booming. In 55, they built a museum. Anybody remember the museum? That was just a collection of gems. I mean, the stuff that was in there was incredible. And that, you know, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, they had a lot of interesting things in there, and a lot of stuff was donated by people. People would bring stuff in there. Hildegard's would buy a bunch of stuff, but a lot of the stuff they'd get, whether it was decorations for the outside or the museum exhibits, that was donated. So anyway, I'd say the 50s were the time that it really started booming. Now, when I worked there in 63 and 64, there was still growth. We were kind of booming. There was things added to the playground area. We added a bunch of other lawn things on the grounds and things like that. A lot of people were coming, either families or even like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Bible camp groups. I mean, we'd have school buses come in. We'd have parades of canoes coming into the lake onto the dock. And it was really booming. And I think we were still adding things back in 63 and 64. In 65, the area across the access road towards Pope Lake and Manneman Lake came up for sale. Now that had previously been a place called Taddywawa. And that's something we admittedly don't really know that much about. We don't remember much about that, at least ourselves. But in '65, that came up for sale, so Hildegard's bought that and expanded Whispering Pines. So it went from 15 acres to 30 acres with the expansion of that. There was a house on there that was up there in the top right-hand corner. That house came with the place, and they used that in the later years for either friends or people to come up that were visiting or help that was working there. In '66, in August of '66, Chris Hildegard died. Now, he died of a heart attack, and ironically, he had heart problems when he left Chicago. But he came up here, and the famous story was, among people that knew him, was he came up here and he threw his heart medications into the Marl Lake and said, I don't need these anymore, I got the pines to take care of my health. And it worked for a while, I mean, a number of years. But he died in '66. Casey had already moved up here from Chicago, and Casey was such a close friend of theirs, and he kind of ran the place then with Emma. And Emma continued to run it up until '74, through the year of '74. And then she passed away on January, I think the 3rd of '75. Now, we knew Emma, we had contact with Emma. Personally, I knew them fairly well from working with Chris. When I worked there, it was with Chris and a guy named Bob Schmalz, who was our neighbor 2 doors down. And it was just the 3 of us, basically, that were working. But Chris was, even in his later years, was a tough little guy, and he was a hard worker. And we kind of did a lot of stuff there. But then when Casey came in, they had to add more staff and more, I think, what did you have, like 2 other helpers in the yard?
Well, there was one full-time for sure, that was Dennis, and then they had like a 3-person family group or something, and I'm not quite sure what the deal was with them and then me.
Yeah.
Plus the refreshment stand and souvenir shop staff that were always.
And they always had typically 2 people, and they'd closed down the stone refreshment stand years ago, probably in the 50s. But they kept the hut going, and they always had 2 people in the hut. They had 2 people, I believe, in the main souvenir shop with our grandma, who worked there about 12 years.
Yeah.
And I think 1 or 2 in the annex.
Yeah.
So you had maybe 5, 6, you had probably 6 of the workers, the building workers, and then you had the grounds people and stuff.
So you had a total staff, not counting Casey, of maybe 10.
Yeah.
9 or 10.
So things have been booming. And Joe's going to talk in a minute. He wants to run through a typical day of working at the park was like. Now, anybody here work in the park at one time? Anyway, if you do, I want to hear your experiences about it too, but we, maybe not yours. I should stop right now. I was going to do this later. This is Bruce and Mary Anderson. Bruce Anderson has been my friend since the early '60s, and we used to hang out together a lot in those days on Marl Lake. His parents had the place next to us, and we had quite a little gang. No, we had a youth club of his family and our family, and then you had assorted cousins and foster kids and all kinds of kids around. Yeah. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and we spent a lot of time together, and have gotten reconnected now fairly recently. But anyway, by the time that came to be, when Joe came on, it wasn't so much, and I think you can talk about that a little bit more, it wasn't so much adding on to the park, it was trying to maintain what was there. And things were changing. People were not coming in like they used to. Costs were higher. They still tried to maintain it without charging anybody anything outside of the stuff they wanted to buy. But stuff had changed on the chain too. You had more activity on the big chain. You had more nightclubs. You had more bars. You had people were more into the faster paced entertainment than sitting around having a picnic in the pines. But anyway, I'll let Joe talk about that when he gets to it. When Emma died in '74, we had kept in touch, my wife Chris and our daughter Tara, who was about this big at the time. We'd go over and see Emma quite a bit. Now, we'd been gone. I'd been in the service for 4 years, so I'd only get back sporadically from '69 to '73, but when we did, we'd always make it a point to go to Marl Lake and the park cottage and the park and Emma. That end of '73, we moved back to Stevens Point, so we were over here a lot. And we spent a lot of time with Emma that fall. And if I would have been as interested then as I have been lately about the history of the park and how that all came to be, we'd really have something. Because we heard so much stuff and saw so many pictures that she had about how that went. And when we were there, we took her Thanksgiving dinner that November, and then we were coming back, I think once, and then we were going to come back at Christmas time, but by the time we got back, she'd already passed away, so we missed her then. But anyway, then it went to the state. Now they had decided, Chris and Emma back as far as 1960, to will it to the state. They wanted to keep it like it was, and they wanted to not have it developed. And it was a memorable, or commendable, I should say, effort they made to keep it like that. And the state got it. But there was some friction then because the state wasn't able to keep it the way it was, which is understandable because the state couldn't put money into it. And that's gotten worse as the years go by because it became part of Hartman Creek Park in 1975. Well, I'm sorry, in 74. And no, 75, I'm sorry. It was 75. It became part of Hartman Creek Park when it was turned over to them. It took them 2 years to get that all taken apart and taken down to its natural state because there was so much stuff. There were like 150 birdhouses. There were all these other fountains and statues. And
chipmunks playing poker.
oh God, yeah, I forgot about that. Does anybody remember outside of the annex there was a glass case that was tall, an octagon case, and it was squirrels and chipmunks playing poker in there?
Taxidermy.
Yeah, not live ones. But anyway, there was a 2-day auction on June 7th and 8th of 75. And I know Bruce was there. And we went. It was hard. It was hard being there to see all that stuff go.
It was.
And it all got cleaned out. And then in 77, the state opened it up again as a day use park, which was good. And it kept it back to its natural state. And I was upset at first. I thought, oh God, I can't ever go back there. And I didn't for like 12 years. But then it hit me that, well, you know, the state wasn't in a position to keep it going the way it was. And it was kind of a different society and a different culture now, even in the 70s, in terms of what people wanted to do. And it didn't have the appeal that it used to have in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, or even the 60s. The other thing I should comment about is about the time Joel came along in 68, there started to be some little bit of not trouble, but vandalism and stuff and things going on there at night that people would sneak in. We never had a problem
Until Joe came along?
until Joe came. But it never mind. Anyway, it just was, a society had changed a little bit. And there were beer parties and stuff in the parking lot. I mean, Casey started patrolling the parking lot with a handgun at night, which had never been heard of before. And I know even in the 50s and 60s, Chris would say, we've never had a problem out here. Never had to call the sheriff's department or anything like that. But, you know, things had changed. Society changed. And a lot of people were upset, myself included initially, that it couldn't be kept the same it was. But then I realized there's no way it would have worked. I mean, even now, they're cutting the funds at Hartman Creek Park. They've got a minimal staff out there trying to keep up with stuff that's going on there. And if it hadn't been for a lot of interested local groups like the Friends of Hartman Creek and stuff like that, there'd really be a problem because they're short-staffed and it wouldn't have lasted the way it was. There was even talk when the state got it that somebody, who I'll not say the name of, was lobbying to have like a water park thing built on Marl Lake with a water slide and electric boats and all this stuff, and that got shot down by the DNR, thank God. So anyway, that's where it is now. That's kind of the history part of it. Any questions on that so far? Any comments? See this, I'm sorry, yeah.
Where did the funding come from to pay all the staff then if they didn't charge people at the entrance?
They had a bunch of money. They had that $1 million sitting there, whatever it was, they had it, you know, and they kept buying things. And oh, I should say, after the stock market recovered, after the crash, you know, it started building back up. And then I think he's kept investing money and got it going.
Well, and they hired 10-year-olds.
Yeah, right.
With horses. is.
Well, I did better than she did, though, because when I was 14 in '64, I got my first W-2 form. I was an adult because I was getting Social Security taken out. I made $164 the whole summer. I bought a bike, and I gave it to my brother.
You did in 1968, I got about $350 for the summer and bought a trombone.
I got a horse.
Yeah, yeah. They weren't high-paying jobs. I think we figured I think you had put it together that our grandma Mildred had worked there 6 days a week,
Yep,
10 hours a
9
day.
or 10 hours a day, and she made $40 a week.
Yeah, yeah. But it was a labor of love because it was kind of a family there, you know, and it was all pretty good that way. Oh, I should mention one thing about the setup. They had a unique communication system. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but they had crank telephones. And they had them hooked up in the house, the two souvenir shops, the museum, and the hut. And it was a code. Like one ring, I think, was like the house, and two was something, and maybe the souvenir shop. But if you listen for 4 or 5 rings, you know who was supposed to pick up the phone. So it was pretty interesting that way. Anyway, that's the history piece of it. Joe's going to go through what it was like working there in '68. And sorry.
Do you want to walk through the pictures first? Do you want me to do that? Or?
Well, we can do it. I'm up here, so. But they're not tired of listening to me yet. I haven't had any tomatoes thrown at me.
I've seen Yeah, we'll just show you some of the things that Jeff's been talking about here. So here's the hut. This is the second big refreshment stand.
And there are the cases that Bruce was talking about.
That's the candy, there's
Yeah.
the cigars.
And that was before Elsie, I think.
And the next two are of the people. That's Emma Hildegard.
That was in the later years. That would have
This would be
been.
about 1970 or 71 probably.
Yeah.
Just a few years before.
She died at 87. She was there in that house running that park until she was 87 years old. And Chris died at 79.
There's Chris with his buddy.
Squirrel.
Yeah, I remember that.
That is the main counter in the big souvenir shop.
And that's the other thing they had. I don't know if you mentioned that, Jan, but the jewelry.
Yeah, they had really nice, like Black Hills gold and a lot of turquoise jewelry, so, yeah. So that was kind of intermingled with the kind of weird, vulgar ashtrays and stuff.
So they did make some money off some of those things to pay the peanuts. I mean, pay the money to the staff.
You still got that ring?
No, I don't. I broke it. Bruce and I got matching Thunderbird rings when we were teenagers. They used to have yours, I'm sure.
Somewhere, yeah.
But I finally got another one, though, kind of.
Wore it for years
Yeah.
and years.
So did I.
Always.
Anyway, that's Chris. The uniform of the day for working there as a kid was you always carried a pocket knife, back when you could do that, and book of matches and a bunch of peanuts in your pocket for the squirrels and the chipmunks. That's the playground.
And that's the refreshment stand in the background. This building over here is the annex, or the second souvenir shop, the smaller one. And the hillside to the lake is right behind those chairs, sort of in that tree line there.
That's the picnic grove. It ran pretty much from the hut to the houses.
Yeah.
And that area was all cleared out. It was all clean, basically. And by the time we got there, it was all pea gravel, which Joe, I'm sure, is going to talk about because he has nightmares about raking pea gravel.
I really got all that pea gravel to this day.
That's the Fountain of Youth. Now, in our picture book back there of the photographs of the park, there's about 4 or 5 different photos of this. But the point of that is it was constantly changing. Like the statues came later, the chairs were changing. That was one thing that they did, he did, especially Chris. He was always changing things around a little bit. And they were adding things, but they were changing a lot of the stuff they already had. And that's the house in the background where they lived.
Didn't you keep the koi fish in there too?
Yeah, they did. And those big goldfish.
Yeah.
And that's Linger Lane. That's that stone
Yeah.
coffee shop.
That's the original coffee shop. That actually stayed there for a number of years after everything else was torn down. So that was the last surviving building of the original structure, but that eventually went too.
Yeah, they use it, the state used it for storage of little equipment and stuff like that there. But they had to take it down because the windows got smashed and the roof started leaking. But it was a combination of age, time, and vandals, because I guess the vandals were not nice to it when they sneak in there.
What was the object of all the chairs there?
People just to sit, and sometimes they'd be full. Sometimes they'd be.
There were two kinds of chairs that were ubiquitous around the park, and this is one of them. And there was a continuous metal piece that kind of came around, formed the armrests and down to the foot, and it was all one piece on each side. And then they had the wood slats and the wood form here. And one of the things that we did every day that I'll go through later in a second. One of the things you had to do is go through and wipe those down, so that because the trees would drip on them and so forth, because they would get sticky and they didn't like that.
And they called that Linger Lane, right?
Yeah.
Linger Lane.
There's the clock, some of the clocks in the museum. And those, because you got some really nice ones out of there, didn't you?
Yeah, one of the big attractions in the museum was the clock collection, which is here.
And he had a big collection of guns, and he had a big collection of stuffed taxidermy animals.
Could I say something on the clock?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe he would wind quite a few of those clocks.
Oh, you're right.
Because as kids, I can remember going in there on the hour, just to hear them go off.
That's right, that's right, that's right.
How many remember this?
I could have had those.
Really?
Yeah, Emma was going to give them to me, but I didn't know how the heck I'd transport them because at that time they were all brittle. But they
Where
did
would you have, right?
in the living room. But no, those, I believe those ended up going to the University of Stevens Point.
Really?
That was sort of,
Found somewhere? That was the story on them.
I really don't know. But they were found in the death lock because they were fighting and their horns got hooked together and they couldn't get them apart. And I don't know how they did it, but they stuffed them and did the taxidermy with them together somehow. And I don't know how he ended up getting it, but that was a main attraction. But you can see some of the other stuffed animals they had back in there.
yeah, just for reference, the museum here would be right over there. That's the park truck.
Beaver truck.
That's coming to the Historical Society, but it's a mess right now, so I'm trying to get it out of my woods at home. No, it doesn't. But it's got all the parts. That's an old Borden's milk truck, 1932 International that came out of Chicago from Borden's.
That's parked right behind the museum.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the route between the main driveway and down to, the big souvenir shop would be down there. The lake there's a staircase just down past there. The museum building would be off here to the right. There's the old original coffee shop, and I want to point out these.
Anybody can guess what the fence
Anybody know what that fence is made out of?
I know.
I know you
But I
would.
could say that.
Coffin handles. We got a hold of a load of coffin handles and made this fence extended all the way down in front of the house. And we made a couple of benches out of them too. Worked fine.
There's a pretty picture. They started out in the mid-30s planting 500 begonias in these stretches, and I think at the end, by the time they were done, there was up to 650 begonias. They'd plant every April or May, as soon as the weather allowed them to. Now those tables back there, they call the correspondence tables, and what people would do, they'd sit there and visit, but they all sold a lot of postcards in the souvenir shops. So people could buy stamps and souvenirs and the postcards. They'd come out there and they'd fill out the postcards, and over to the left, you can't really see it, but there was a little stone pedestal with a covered wagon that said mail on it. And every afternoon at the end of the day before we quit, when we worked there, one of our jobs was to take the mail out of that mailbox and take it down to the road, put it in the mid-mail box, so the mailman would take it out the next day. But it was quite the system they had to send postcards out. Yeah, there you can see the,
And that's the main souvenir shop there. There's a stairway to the lake right here. The other thing worth pointing out here is the flag. This was a big concrete and stone flag that they had above a little passageway here into this backyard back in here. There weren't 50 states yet. This must be 48 or even fewer, I don't know. But in each of these stars, you can't see, but embedded in each of the stars is a small stone from a particular state.
and all 48 were represented in that. There's the George Washington rock. No, no, that's
Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam. I'm sorry, Uncle Sam.
Yeah, this is just one representation of the sorts of things they had in the rock garden, which was fairly extensive.
And there's that accursed windmill. There was a windmill halfway up the steps, or 2/3 of the way up the steps. And every day we had to reach through the doors in the windmill, clean it out, and it'd always be soggy ice cream wrappers and just...
That's the staircase we were talking about earlier, and it's still there. And that's Hildegard's house at the top.
Can I ask a question? Is there like a little thing off to the right, like a little seating area?
Yeah.
upstairs? Yeah.
That was gone later. This is a fairly early picture, but originally there was a little midway bench arbor type thing there. Right here.
Because the original arbor and flower beds and garden was over in that area there, off the picture.
And when you get to the bottom,
There's the famous covered wagon.
that's the pier. Those are the 3 wagons. The staircase ran right about there. The boathouse is over here. One of the displays at the bottom of the hill, that's the little elf guy running water through the windmill, little bridge here. You walk over. This staircase would go up and came out. This is the staircase I was pointing out earlier by the entrance of the souvenir shop. This is the bottom part of it. These were all split rails along those. More flowers down by the lakefront. And in the background here is lurking, yes, a bench made out of coffin handles.
But the skies were painted yellow.
Did you ever have to mow this?
Yeah, that's the only place in the park we ever mowed.
You had to drag from more down the hill to do it.
And drag it up was the harder part. Here's the nice picture of the pier. And the oatmeal machines.
And what did the sign say?
Tame fists do not molest.
That's right. This is before people discovered kayaks, so the normal things docked at the pier were these Grumman canoes, aluminum canoes. The D signifies Ding's Dock. That's where most of them were rented.
And those were the days on a Saturday afternoon you could see the lake, unlike now, when there's so many people on it. There's Chris feeding his fish.
With the ubiquitous cigar.
Yep.
Fish.
There's the gazebo.
Didn't they float that across the lake when they took it?
I think they did. I think they did on the ice.
And for reference, the channel to Pope Lake is right here. And that is today. Those are the photos.
Okay, you want to run them through a quick?
Yeah, I can do that.
And then when Joel's done, we're going to have a brief time to give you the opportunity to talk about any of your experiences and your memories and things like that. Then we're going from the past into the present and the future. And Fred Silaway and some others maybe are going to be talking about what's going on at the park now and what's being looked at in the future.
All right, so I worked there in 1968 as I was 13 years old at the time, and did a lot of things that would not pass muster today as far as safety protocols. For one thing, we spent a lot of time going to the dump. You know, maintenance-wise, there's really two things that you have to worry about in terms of maintaining a facility like this, and one is trash management. So we spent a lot of time doing trash management. Trash was collected in 55-gallon drums, many of which were pierced so that you could actually burn them. That was our idea of sterilizing them. So you'd go around and collect all the trash from these 55-gallon drums, which were scattered throughout the grounds. And you had to do a couple things associated with that as well. One was check for pop bottles, because they sold a lot of soda at the hut, at the refreshment stand, and in those days bottles were all returnable. So you had to go through and tease those out and put them in the crates, which were stacked along the side of the refreshment stand. The other thing you had to watch out for were baby raccoons, because the raccoons would get into these things and the adults could get out and the babies could not. And baby raccoons, I learned very quickly, are not very grateful creatures. They're not very appreciative of your attempts to liberate them, and they express this in ways that can be noisy and painful. So basically turn the thing over and shoo the little critter out, and then you could go ahead with your trash collection. So we dealt with the 55-gallon drums. We consolidate all that and take the trash up to the big incinerator, which is there. No, that's not it. That's not.
Incinerator was down by the plate.
Right. Anyway, it was at the far end of that. Anyway, so you take it up to the incinerator and burn everything. Then after a week or so, you'd have to clean out the incinerator and put the ashes in what? 55-gallon drums. Load them on the pickup truck and take it all to the dump. Well, in those days, we'd ride all the way to the dump on the tailgate of the pickup truck, bouncing our feet off the road as we went, and this was great fun. So a lot of things like that in terms of safety protocols and liability issues that would be a real problem in later years and later decades, but we had no problem with it. There were also different kinds of trash receptacles around the place. They had little iron buckets hanging on hooks that were really supposed to be used for cigarettes or whatever, but people throw everything in there. So you had to clean those out.
And that's where those greasy, sticky, slimy ice cream wrappers came out.
Yeah, and as Jeff already mentioned, whatever genius decided to build that windmill on the staircase, and it was very nice. It was a nice little model windmill, but they put working doors in the thing. Big mistake, because this became another place where people would put trash. So we had to clean all that out. So you go around, you'd pick up all the trash, you'd burn the drums to make some pretense of cleanliness, burn all the trash. You could burn in those days too, right? Burn all the trash in the big incinerator, and then once a week or so you'd clean out the incinerator and take it to the dump. So trash management was a big part of it. The other thing that you had to do all the time was rake. The whole place was covered, with a few exceptions, was covered in this pea gravel. And we had special big industrial rakes. They actually had interchangeable or replaceable tines. And every day, first thing when you got on the job was you'd go around and you'd rake all of the pea gravel, whether it needed it or not.
But it looked nice
And make nice little straight lines.
for about a half hour.
Yeah, it looked nice until people showed up. And then that was that. But that's probably my strongest memory, because it's what I did most often. So you'd show up at work in the morning, you'd rake the whole place, you'd go around, take care of the trash. So that was a big part of the maintenance. The other part of maintaining a place like this is repairing things. So lots of things would require fixing over the years. That's the reason I have this slide up here. If you look at some of these picnic tables, a lot of them have posts for both the table and the seats sunk straight into the ground, like a fence post. Well, they'd rot. So you'd have to replace those from time to time. There was always something that needed painting. The railing on the on the stairways down to the lake might need some help. Even the pier would need a repair from time to time. So you had to kind of go around when you made your first rounds cleaning up trash and kind of mark what looked rotten or faded or peeled or might otherwise need attention for help. So that was essentially it as far as the job on a day-to-day basis. What happened when depended mostly on a couple of things, and they're related. One was how busy the park was, and the other was what the weather was like. Those correlated, of course, but not perfectly. So on Sundays, for example, we didn't do a lot of fixing of picnic tables on Sundays because there were a lot of people around, so you had a lot of little additional errands to run. You'd have to take change from the house down to the hut because they ran out of change. Or more sloppy Joe mix or whatever it was, the radioactive whatever, and get it down there and not burn yourself, or the plants or chipmunks or whatever. Anyway, so you had a lot of errands, a lot of things like that. You had to go out and patrol for trash in our case, but you had to go out and look at the parking lot and clean the trash out of there. You'd have to mow it once in a while. You have to put the flag up. They had a big flagpole in the parking lot. Somebody had to take care of that. The oatmeal machines you saw on the pier, are they full? Are there any quarters in the wishing well?
No, Bruce took them all.
that the local reprobates didn't get to yet. Those sorts of things. So there were a lot of sort of occasional errands and so forth. And those tended to be much higher on days where the park was busier, which were typically weekends or when large church camps or other groups were coming through, which wasn't necessarily on the weekend. But those were the sorts of things that you needed to keep up on to sort of keep the place functional. Little courtesy things. I mentioned wiping down the chairs. We did that every day. There were two types of chairs. We've seen pictures of one already. The other chair or the other kind of seating that was ubiquitous in the park were old metal tractor seats.
Oh, yeah.
And they on like an I-bar that they'd mounted into a concrete base that you could sit on. Of course, you had to keep an eye on things like the playground equipment. It doesn't do, some of this playground equipment, frankly, was a little bit dangerous to start with.
And they had a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
But, so your safety officer for the playground equipment. It doesn't do to have chains falling off the swings or the slats breaking off of the merry-go-rounds and that sort of thing. So you had to keep track of that and sort of note and take care of, when time allowed, make repairs on those things as well.
You have to help sometimes a lot with watering the flowers.
Flower care was a big deal. You saw the begonias. Well, begonias aren't perennials, so every year you got to do the begonias, but you also have to keep up with them. Yep. Every day after a big rain, you'd have to go through with these little twist ties and stakes and pick up the drooping begonias.
Carefully doing it.
Very carefully. Yep.
Because Emma inspected.
She did. Emma was diligent. She'd even point out areas that were not raked. The younger employees were a little bit afraid of Emma. She could be a little bit blunt, but she was actually a very kind woman. She put up with an awful lot from underage employees and that sort of thing. But she was particular about what she wanted done and how it should look. But you learn a lot doing that kind of thing at a young age. Basic carpentry skills, or at least how to drive a nail, basic painting, even a little plumbing from the fountains and the little water wheels and whatever, which would malfunction from time to time. So it was educational in that sense. I guess I should also mention that the year I worked there was very atypical, because in 1968 a big windstorm came through, and the whole park shut down for almost half the season because it was such a mess. There were massive numbers of those big pine trees down. There was no power for days, literally. So we had to, that meant that none of the refrigeration in the hut worked. So we had to clean out all the ice cream, take it to the dump. We stopped in King along the way and just handed it out. It was free ice cream because going anyway. But a lot of my experience in that 1 year when I was officially employed was doing things that were not part of the normal routine. Normal routine was maintenance. Trash management, raking, appearance, making sure that the exhibits and the flowers and so forth were up to snuff. You had to clean out, they had a prism that overlooked the lake. It had 2 glass pieces, panes mounted at an angle, and they filled it with water. Yeah, kind of like that. Well, water gets scummy. Somebody's got to deal with that. So a lot of things like that. Split rail fence was very old. You know, the piece would fall out from time to time. So you do all these sorts of things. But in 1968, we also had literally scores of massive pine trees down, damage, no power, coping with spoilage of food and beverages in the refreshment stand, and all those sorts of issues. So again, you know, as a 13-year-old, I spent entire days working with a chainsaw. You know, basically no training, no safety equipment. I didn't cut down trees, but anything on the ground that was not huge was fair game.
Let's count your fingers and toes here.
Got them all. They called in professional crews for the heavy stuff, obviously, but a lot of the basic cleanup was done by those of us who worked there at the time, and that was sort of an extra set of experiences, let's say. Yeah, I guess my fondest or most enduring memory, as I said, other than digging around in the trash and dealing with combative raccoons, was the pea gravel, the raking. You did that maybe twice a day, every day. To the point where, when I went back a couple decades later, I actually spent time looking around for pea gravel. Convinced that it had to be there somewhere. Never found any. So, nature takes its course. Nowadays, I go back and look, and like everyone who's got memories of the place, and it's kind of hard to even tell where the buildings were anymore. But even the pea gravel's gone. Yeah.
What do you guys do with all the pine needles that land in the pea gravel? Is that what you're raking?
Most of it, well, there were enough areas that were left wild or sort of untamed that we could just sort of dump it in there. The main picnic area, most of it went down the hillside. There was also down by, behind the, right off the parking lot, behind the incinerator, there was a big pit. And a lot of branches, pine needles, whatnot, went into that pit by Casey Nowicki's house. So that would be, yeah, there was a big pit kind of right in here. And the incinerator was right about here. So that's, yes, please.
What months was the park open?
Roughly, we were school kids, so we'd show up after we got out of school, so it'd be pretty much early June, and until around school started again. But the park was open with Casey and Emma and kind of a skeleton crew, people working the souvenir shops and the refreshment stand, roughly Memorial Day to Labor Day, but they extended that.
About in the mid-50s, they started opening up after Labor Day,
Yeah.
as long as the weather held.
Yeah, it's funny, now that you mention it, I don't think there really was a formal closing date. I think they just closed up when the crowd started to thin out after Labor Day. Days worked like that too, by the way. You never knew when you're going to get off work.
Yeah.
You know,
They
you
call you and tell you when to shut the hut down or the souvenir shop.
yeah, when the crowds petered out, you know, this time of year it stays light fairly late. People would stick around. You'd wait for the call.
And get paid the same.
Huh?
They get paid the same.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, good job. Yes, sir.
So, the one day you had 6,500 visitors, where do all those cars park them? That park's not paying.
Well, they didn't all come exactly at the same time, but people would move in and out, but it got really tight. The parking lot was probably, well, at least twice as big as it is now. Because all those trees weren't there. A lot of those trees weren't there, but it was a lot bigger.
Is that parking lot all gravel then? at that time?
No, it was all grass, except for the road going in that's still there. I think at one point that was even paved. But yeah, it was tight though. And then they'd have, I remember for a number of years there, they had the Model A Club of the state coming in there. So they had all these old cars that come in on top of it. And then you get school buses and everything else, and it got a little tight. I do want to add one thing to jobs, and that's Jan.
Oh,
At the ripe old age of what, 11?
yes,
Tell them what you did when you were 11 besides doing the inventory.
I was the museum bouncer.
The only place in the park that they really wanted you to pay was 10 cents to get into the museum.
But only if you were over 10 years old.
Yeah, so,
So I had to check people out, gauge whether they were really under 10 or not. If they were trying to sneak in and not pay, I had to wrestle them to the ground.
or steal the money, right?
Right, well, and the money was like nailed to a desk. It was like a wooden box with a slot on top.
Yeah,
and
remember
nailed
that.
to the desk, so nobody could run off
Well,
with it.
Jan was nice to us, she let us in.
Yeah,
Oh, I know you.
well, we lied about our age.
Yeah, so that was the other thing I did, was I sat at the desk in the museum for like all day long, and on good weeks, I'd make $1 if they were busy that day.
Well, you already got a horse, what more did you want?
Well, that was a different job though.
It got a little spooky in the museum. You sat there too long, and you'd think the animals are looking at
It
you.
was, but it was fascinating because, it had so much stuff that even though I was there like once a week, all day long, I think it was only Sundays that I did this. I don't know who did it the rest of the time.
Well, didn't Randy do that
He
once
did
in the
for a
grand?
while.
Our other brother Randy, who's passed away, he did that for a while too.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they just really trusted humanity. Which,
During the week,
which,
maybe.
Well, they did for everything else, but just
Yeah.
the,
and you could be there for 8 hours every week and still not see everything, I think.
oh yeah.
Well, I was kind of short, so it's harder to see.
Well, you were only 11, but
I know.
you sure kept law and order there, though.
I,
Okay. Yes, sir. Pardon? No kids. Actually, we never did quite figure out where all the proceeds went when they auctioned everything off. They auctioned everything off above the ground when the state got it. And I think there was talk about a niece and a nephew of Chris's. Does that ring any bells? A niece and a nephew that lived in Chicago that received all that. But I don't remember ever seeing them or hearing about them, But no, they had no kids. They had a lot of friends, though, a lot of people. That was the other thing that happened. Well, oh God, that's the other thing I forgot to tell you. And this ties into that. How many of you have been on the Facebook page that we've got set up, Whispering Pines Park, Waupaca Memories? Did you ever run into this character called Willie Boston? Does that ring a bell? He sounds like a Massachusetts gangster, right?
I'm Willie Boston.
and how did you get that name?
Yeah, tell him that's how it ties in.
Right.
They did have a kid named Willie, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Willie was the name of Hildegard's little Boston Terrier. It was by the time we knew him, an aged,
Fat.
portly,
Well, I described him as a belching, farting, drooling, grouchy old dog.
he's got it, that was Willie. So Willie Boston, which is my stage name for the Facebook page, is actually a reference to Hildegard's dog.
And in the morning, it'd be great when I'd go there when Chris was still alive. He'd always let Willie out in the morning before people came to run. And Chris had 2 hearing aids. He was very hard of hearing at the end there, but I don't mean any disrespect by mocking him, but out there, Willie, come back here, Willie, come back here. And he'd chase him around the park.
Emma, did the same
Eva
thing.
did the same thing too, didn't she?
She'd be out there screaming at the dog, who's right behind her, you know, looking at her.
I feel like you learned that from him, because I feel like you do that a lot, screaming at the cottage now over your dog.
You know what Sunday is? Father's Day. Okay. Yes, yes, there was. Joey has more experience with that than I do, but they had, I think when I was there, she let some people camp down in the area behind the annex.
Right.
But then when they bought Taddy Wawa, you said that there was a camping area in there.
Yeah, well, I never saw this myself, but they had trash bins and whatever, one of these 55-gallon drums down along the lake shore below the annex, which was, here's the playground, the annex is that second souvenir shop. So right along the lake shore there, and I think they used to let Boy Scout groups camp there or something like that decades ago. But after they bought the Taddy Wawa property over here, for I'm not sure how many years, but in 1968, the year I was there working, for sure, they allowed camping in this area back in here, up in the Taddy Wawa.
And it was
area.
free too, wasn't it?
And it was free. It was sort of the best kept secret in the state for a year or two, and then they shut it down. That was after I left, and I never knew if there were problems there or that sort of thing. Not in '68. One of the things that I was talking about, the kinds of things that we did to help maintain the place and keep it clean and so forth. We never really did much down in here. Nobody went down there. After Taddy Wawa folded and the Hildegards bought it out, this was the Taddy Wawa refreshment stand. We only used it for storage. It was a really strange cinder block, bright pink building. Looked weird. But there was that. The house and the garage that Jeff mentioned that the Hildegards used for guests or seasonal help or whatever. And for a time, they allowed camping in here about where the restrooms are now, the modern ones, and then behind there. But I don't even remember having to clean that up very much. We went through maybe a couple times a week and picked up trash that people might have left and emptied the bins, and that was it. Nobody went down on the old Taddy Wawa lakefront or any of that I recall.
No baby raccoons over there?
No, those were all serious.
What about your memories? Anybody have any memories they want to share? Thoughts they want to share? Experiences? Bruce, you can. I suppose you do.
So, I'll share some of
Yeah.
it.
Don't use names.
No, I won't. I want to thank Jeff and Joe and Jan, for allowing me to say something. My folks originally bought the last lot on the lake back in about '49 or so. So they built a cottage there, and that's how we got experienced with Wishbone Pines Park. And some of the things that I remember, fond memories of Wishbone Pines Park, were basically, because we were over there all the time, free park, and the Hildegards. They always sat at the end of the hut in their little chairs. And when we'd go by, we'd always wave and say hi, and they always wave and say hi back and smile and that type of thinking, And then times when Mr. Hildegard would run the souvenir shop on the far end of the park, us kids would go in there and it wasn't too busy. He would tell us, well, you go through with anywhere in this place, he says, and pick out all the broken ones. Keep in mind, he had all these little squares with all different kinds of wooden objects in it, toys, and you name it. So we would go through there finding all the broken ones. And we'd come up and show them, oh, you can keep that one, you can keep that one, put that one back. And like Jan was saying, she was in charge at times with that dime, okay? So we come over there and we sort of, Jan, okay, go on. Don't let nobody see you, So yeah, we'd roll across the lake, a lot of times, park our boat over there and go up. And I gotta admit to Jeff though, the 2 years he worked there, I really missed him. He was my buddy on the lake. And we did a lot
We made up for it after hours.
a lot of fishing together and all that, Even one lake, it was a lake fall, it was snowing outside. he came over to me, or I came over to him, I said, hey, let's jump in the lake. And we looked at each other, good idea. We went and got our swimming suits on, and it was snowing outside, and we went and jumped in the lake.
You may not know this, but that was what twisted my mind to start doing those polar bear plunges.
Oh, that could be.
For 2 years, I did the polar bear plunge at Becker Marine. What year was that? Like 2010 or 2011 or something? And I always did it in a Santa Claus suit. And the first year, I almost drowned because I forgot that those get really heavy when they get wet. But the second year, I was upset because nobody really paid me any attention. So my grandson, Tara's oldest, Bryce, came with me, and we dressed him up as an elf. So he and I did the polar bear plunge, and we got on the front page of the Appleton Post-Crescent. And then we retired. But yeah, we had some good times. We had some good times there. And he's right, because at the time, even when I was working there, the kind of the schedule that Hildegard's had, Chris would be working with us in the morning. Then around noon, they'd go down to the hut. They'd have something to eat, and they'd always sort of sit in their same chairs, and sometimes at a picnic table. They kind of hold court down there. And friends that come through, they're always visiting with people. And it was kind of a ritual they had.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to mention about the souvenir shop, and Jan touched on it when she did the inventory, but underneath that, there was a basement. And there was a storeroom down there where they kept all of the supplies, and I was totally traumatized by that storeroom.
Yeah, it was kind of a walkout. You go down the steps towards the lake, and it was about 4 steps down to be off to your right, I think. So it was kind of tucked under, but it was creepy.
Well, it was creepy in a couple of ways. First of all, it was real dark. There was one light bulb in there. And then you had this list that you could hardly read with the scribbling about my moccasins and something else. And then it smelled. It smelled like leather and cedar, because half the stuff that they sold in the souvenir shop was cedar.
Cedar. Yeah.
But anyway, it was a nice setup. I mean, they had it figured out, but it worked out good.
I got a question with that picture there. The Hildegards always kept a sign-in book there.
Yes.
And for years, I thought you had gotten that.
I never did get it.
You
Never got it. I don't know where that went.
Yes, yeah, because I can remember reading in there, and how it was in about 1942. Somebody had wrote in there during the war and said how wonderful it was to find such a peaceful, quiet place to come and rest during such a time of turmoil in the world.
Isn't that the truth? That's yeah. And right in the back, there was that stairway, and then there was a stairway coming up to the back door of the souvenir shop. And there was a counter on the step. So you could step on it, it would count you.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where they got the numbers. That's where they...
Rockin' kids would figure it out and jump on it.
Yeah, but see, I always figured that was...
There really wasn't that many visitors.
Well, I think... But see, I think there were, because a lot of people didn't go that way. So they didn't even get in there. But then you did have the kids that would jump on it and stuff. So I think it might have balanced itself out a little bit. But no, I thought of that too, Bruce, and I don't know where that went. But you know, even in the 30s, I was reading stuff. I got a lot of the stuff that I put in the book came out of articles from the Waupaca County Post over the years that I had permission to reprint, and a lot of stuff we had from Emma and that and stuff. But they had, when they started getting a lot of people, I think in the late 30s, they already had representatives from 43 of the 48 states had visited, plus like 12 foreign countries. So it was drawing people early on that continued and expanded and increased. Other experiences? Yes, sir.
Just, I remember everything you guys talked about. I'd forgotten about the prism. Thank you for that memory. That was really
Well, that actually was Mike Kirk did that. He got the model.
Two things come to mind. One is on a hot day, you went to Whispering Pines because it was cooler.
Yes.
Significantly cooler.
Yeah.
Just the dappled sunlight. The other thing I remember vividly is the little like canning jar ring.
Oh, yes.
They were wondering about there, and they had little roofs over the top of them, and you could throw the rings.
Do you remember the signs that they had, the little things sticking out of? Those were old road signs. They were old road signs. Then you had the canning ring, the jar rings that you throw.
Yeah, one was a howdy doody face and one was a clown.
Right.
And they used a like canning jar ball rubber seal rings.
Yeah, they were pretty innovative with a lot of the stuff they put together there. And you know, even during the Depression, a lot of the stuff they did, they ended up buying souvenirs and they sold them and they made some money out of that, obviously. Not so much the sexy Anna dolls, but more like the jewelry and stuff like that. But A lot of the stuff they did, even during World War II, when there was such a shortage of various commodities, they did natural stuff. I mean, they put stuff together, and they could pull it off that way instead of, rubber was in short supply, and a lot of the other rationing was going on, but they could pull it off because they were using natural products and doing everything themselves. That's the other thing they do. When they shut it down and they spend the winters building things, birdhouses, chairs, stuff like that. So they were always busy. The basement was set up like a big workshop down there when I was there. And that's where they put a lot of those chairs and stuff together in the middle of winter to put it out there in the spring.
What happened to all the buildings?
The buildings got torn down. The only exception was 2 buildings. One is the museum, and some people we know bought that, and they cut it in half. You see, the problem was they couldn't move them out of the park because they were too big. But the museum they cut in half, and they moved that out piecemeal, and that's now a cottage down by Wild Rose somewhere. Casey's house was out on the perimeter of the park, and Casey was able to stay there even after the state bought it for as long as he wanted to or lived. But I think he left probably in 78 or 79.
He was only there a couple of years.
Yeah, but they ended up moving that house out somewhere. But the rest of them were all torn down.
Except the one private home. Still one private.
Oh yeah, the one private home in there, and that's always been there, and that's their right to keep that there because they were part of the original group. The one right there. They're part of the original group, so they have the rights to still own that.
I got a memory for you there. We were on that dock one summer, and you dove down and found those blue sunglasses.
Yeah.
There was another private.
That's right.
Right at the entrance, there was another private cottage, just as you walked in. The main entrance that we saw in the very first slide would be right here.
Yep.
And this is all parking lot out here. Casey's place is kind of off to the left. But right as you cross, and as you cross into or past that roadblock, that barrier to go in now, right to the right down that little hill there was another private residence that fronted on Manaman Lake down here. That's gone now.
Yeah.
But there was another private house right there back in the day. This one still exists.
Any other?
There must be cement slabs there then, where those.
I don't think so. Did Fred? You never found any remnants from that one house up by the parking lot, did you?
No,
And nothing from the other buildings either, because they were.
we found some old foundations out there. Found some sinkholes where there were some old wells and like plumbing chases that are still there. We buried them since.
Okay. Well, there must have, the only one I know had the basement, that little half basement, the souvenir shop at the house, Hildegard's house had a basement, so that, maybe there's some remnants of that left, huh?
There's some old stone stairs that go down the Pope Lake too that are out there.
Oh, yeah. Anybody, yes?
Could you please repeat, the one building was cut in half and it's now in Wild Rose?
Well, it's outside of Wild Rose somewhere on one of the county roads.
Oh, it's not downtown?
No.
So it's a private home?
It's a private cottage, yeah. It was friends of the Hildegards bought it at the auction and wanted something, and that was the only one they could really get out, relatively easily, if you can call cutting a house in half easy. But yeah, that was the only one I'm aware of that left. Yes?
Have some of the souvenirs that sold at that auction, have they been donated back to the historic?
Oh, yeah, and we're still working on that. As a matter of fact, sometime in the near future, over behind the Hutchinson house is the King Cottage, and there's going to be a display set up, a permanent display of Whispering Pines Park, Taddy Wawa, and some other things on the upper chain. And we're picking up different memorabilia from Whispering Pines. We got a few things back there. People have been donating stuff. We're finding things kind of harder to come by because we're talking many years are passing here. But yeah, there's still stuff around. And
You bought stuff on eBay.
I've found a lot of stuff for a while on eBay, and a lot of photos. Most of them are postcards. The problem was with the pines in there weren't a lot of good color pictures that I had or we had access to, because of the darkness of the, but a lot of the old pictures were postcards, and that's what they did in the day, you know. Yes?
You mentioned something about a capital campaign or something.
Well, that's where I need Mike to, there's Mike back there.
Yeah, that's the Historical Society trying to raise money for, well, we had to put a new roof on here recently, that was expensive right there. And just a lot of other things. We would really, if we had a way to build a building, to put some of the big things like the Whispering Pines truck, and then I'm working on a Kuhn and a Skinner horse-drawn wagon, and I have the 1921 Nelson boat livery canoe, and we don't really have a place for that kind of stuff, and we need to figure out what to do with that larger stuff. And just, there's any number of projects and to use the money for, and to have it for the future endowment and that type of stuff.
Well, we are, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with the Historical Society, and I've gotten involved with them in the last year, and they've been great to work with. And it's pretty impressive, the stuff that they're all involved in. But I really appreciate the interest they've had in what we're trying to do. And basically our goal in this was just to get information out there, stir up some memories, try to keep those memories alive. Because people that don't know about that walk in there now, they had no clue. They'd have no clue what it was like back then. It was a whole different world. Yes.
One of my greatest memories is coming over to the park for my birthday parties. It was a magical place for me. I grew up in Iola. And then later our family actually did tent camping over there. My parents were friends with the Hildegard, and they allowed us to come in with our tents. I don't think anybody had a trailer or anything like that. But then in 1973, we bought Tom Thumb Mini Golf, and we thought, oh, isn't this wonderful? Whispering Pines Park is so close. And we'll get some of those people to come and play golf. We all have. Well, then the next year was that awful auction, and my daughters and I went to that, and I just felt like crying.
Oh, yeah.
We would love to bought a lot of that, but we didn't have the money.
Yeah, same with us. It was a heartbreaker with that.
It was heartbreaking.
And then when the worst I can remember is seeing having them, and this really hit you too, but when they started doing some of Emma's personal things, you know, from the house, it was like, oh.
But they had to do it. I mean, you got to get rid of it, so. But it's heartening to see. I like the way it's kind of gone. I don't think I didn't want to see it developed. I never really expected or wanted it to be like it used to be, because that was then, this is now. But I always thought it was kind of neat that Mother Nature's kind of reclaimed its child. And Hildegard's kind of rented it for a while or borrowed it for a while, and now it's back to its natural state. And even in the way it's been lately, and Fred and them will talk about the cleanup that's going on there now. But even with that, it's kind of impressive to see what it's like, because that's how it was when they bought it and they came there. And years later, they ended up with something pretty magical, like you said. Yes?
Where did you and your family live that you could go there and work so?
We still have the place on Marl Lake. We're on Marl Lake on Whispering Pines Road. We're the second place up from the boat landing there. And we've been there forever, and that's where Bruce grew up next to us. So we were right across the lake.
We were only summer people.
Well, we were just summer people, yeah. And we still kind of, well, now we've gotten tougher as we got older now, and we stay later. But
Your grandparents were there for the whole summer.
well, they were there for the whole summer because they worked there. But we come over now since we're retired. We spend probably about 8 months at least,
Until November.
some here. But yeah, we've been there forever on Marl Lake, and it's a nice area. I mean, we've always been partial to it. But it was neat because being there, like we've mentioned, I could walk to work. I could get a ride to work. I could take the boat across the lake and stick it in the weeds by the lake and stuff. And sometimes I'd quit work, I'd come back and fish on my way home, or meet Bruce and we'd fish or something. And it was kind of, and we were one of the last outhouses on the lake too, which was interesting, especially when the weather got cold. But for years, up until like 1971, we didn't have any inside plumbing. And then Then they put a septic system in, and I think a year or two later, they came through and they put a sewer system in. So we've got a fairly unused septic tank if anybody's interested in buying one. But what we do is we quit work and we go down and we swim in the lake and take our bath in the lake. You know, it's kind of a pretty simple time.
An independent pump, cold water only,
Right.
electricity,
Yeah.
and in 1967, they put a telephone in as a party line. And that stayed there until cell phone became a thing, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, we finally took it out because
Yeah.
it, but that was a source of entertainment, was the party lines. You could listen, listen to what other people were doing. Anything else for me before I turn it over quick to, we switch into the present and the future? I'd like to introduce Fred Silaway then, and his wife Ann. Fred, like I said, has been very instrumental in doing a lot of these things with Whispering Pines he's going to talk about. He's instrumental in having the wagon restored, and there's some good things going on here.
I'm Fred Silaway. I'm with the Friends of Hartman Creek, and so many thanks to the Jenswalls for helping us relive these very wonderful memories from our youth. The Friends of Hartman Creek is a nonprofit organization, very much like the Waupaca Historical Society. And our mission is to recognize how important nature is to our culture today, as well as Historical Society preserving the past, because those memories, once are gone forever. We love our friends at the Historical Society, and we decided to collaborate with them to try and preserve Whispering Pines. Now, it'll never ever be what it once was, but it is a very special place. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight. I'd also like to recognize some people in the audience today. I've got some of my fellow board members from the Friends group here in the back of the room. Recognize the Jenswalls. We have 2/3 of the park staff here tonight. So, how many acres, Jared, are you guys responsible for?
Approximately 1,500 acres.
1,500 acres, 3 full-time employees. That's
500 acres each.
Yeah, quite a mission indeed.
Impossible.
I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge some of our community partners that help our mission of connecting people with nature. The Historical Society, of course, the Waupaca Convention and Visitor Bureau, the Waupaca Chain of Lakes Association, the Fox Valley Community Foundations, Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin, the Town of Farmington, and Waupaca County Greenways Commission, and lastly, Adventure Outfitters, great partners of ours here in the community. So thanks, everyone, for helping us on our mission. And of course, lastly, thanks to the Hildgards for their commitment to share nature with us lovers for almost forever. Just think what it would have been like if they decided to let that land go up for bid for commercial development. Can you imagine that property today with 10 or 15 mini mansions on it? Yeah, that hurts just to even think about, right? So by state charter, Whispering Pines has a very special designation. It will always be a natural area. It'll never ever be developed and never be sold off or privatized. It also means that you'll never see anything like campgrounds, pavilions, fire rings, concessions. That's not part of the scheme. That park will always remain a sanctuary, a place to meditate, to really reconnect. And our mission as part of the Friends group is to restore the park much to its natural beauty, because Mother Nature can be mean sometimes. She always wins. And left unchecked, she'll take over and actually make the park unusable. And if you've been there in the last several years, you saw some evidence of that. So our mission, we've taken on this very ambitious project to make it accessible to everybody of all ages and abilities. Many of us are getting, who remember being there in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You know, we're a little older now. It's harder to get around. And so we want to make sure that people can go back and reconnect and revisit those people that now live all over the United States. Have them come back, spend time at the Historical Society, spend time out at Whispering Pines. So we've taken on this very aggressive program. It's expensive. Our annual budget at the Friends Group is only $60,000 a year. And we've taken on a project to revitalize Whispering Pines, and that project is estimated to be about $23,000. So we're in the midst of doing fundraising.
Can I add something quick, Fred? And locally, the state's hands are tied. There's no more money. The state is not investing any more money in this. The powers that be, and it's no fault of Jared or anybody else at the park. It's who they answer to, the politicians and everything else.
Right, about 2012, the state legislature determined that the parks had to be self-funding. The taxpayers weren't going to be funding the parks anymore. So admission fees, campground fees get redistributed amongst all of the state parks in the system. So guess what? There's never enough money to go around. There's never enough staffing. And the parks are being used more heavily now than ever before, especially during COVID. So the mission of the Friends Group, grand scheme, connect people with nature. What does that really mean? We do a lot of fundraising. We're filling the gaps between the state's resources and the needs of the park. And we do that through volunteer labor. We do that through providing expertise, and we do that through fundraising. We sell firewood and ice. We sell souvenirs and memorabilia at the park. It's all really good stuff. And every dollar goes back into the park itself. What does this revitalization plan mean for Whispering Pines? It's broken into several phases. We're nearing the end of phase 1, which was get all of the down timber and brush off of the ground so we can actually walk through the park safely. And we finished that up recently, but that's going to be an ongoing project, as the Jenswells know, because that was your job to keep the...
Need some pea gravel?
No pea gravel at all. We're also removing invasive species. We know that the Hildegard's love begonias, right? And they planted a lot of other ornamental shrubs there with the best of intentions, like burning bush. Well, left unchecked, it grows everywhere. Japanese barberry. It becomes like a defensive wall. You can't get through and use some of the parts of the park. Bristly locust is another one we just found. So we're removing some of the invasive species, otherwise they will take over the park, and that's back-breaking effort done with the effort of a lot of volunteers who spend their time out there. The phase 2 we're going to be commencing in the fall, which is repaving some of the paths through the park. So they're not muddy, they're not filled with potholes or erosion, and we're going to extend the path network out to scenic overlooks over Pope Lake, over Marl Lake, with beautiful permanent benches built in, so people can reconnect with nature there and take in the beauty of the state natural area. Many of the paths are going to be loosely paved with compacted stone, so wheelchairs can get out there. There aren't that many parks available that are flat, that are relatively short to get out to such magnificent beauty. So we want to make sure that people with mobility challenges can get out there as well. So that's phase 2. We're going to be, that'll happen in the fall and continue through next spring. The other exciting thing is we want to pay homage to the deep history of the park. to help take us all back there when we revisit and to educate those newcomers for the first time. So we want to install interpretive signage, permanent signage built at various locations in the park that take us back to these wonderful times and memories. We'll have some additional signs too that'll talk about the 125-year-old pine trees, the cedars, the catalpas that are down there that are pretty unique, the tamaracks. We'll talk about the unique water properties of Marl Lake. Why is it so turquoise blue? Well, we'll answer that question. And we'll talk about Pope Lake, which is one of the few undeveloped water bodies in the state of Wisconsin. You won't find any cottages there ever. Here's the sign. This is just a mock-up, but this is one, I don't know, I'm going to bring it over here where I can get the lights a little bit better maybe. I don't know if you can see it here. So a sign mounted near the top of the stone staircase.
Good pictures.
Oh, wonderful pictures.
Yeah.
We see another one like this about the hut area, right?
Covered wagons.
The covered wagons there. The hut area and the playgrounds. We see another sign focusing on Taddywawa. We've got some great photos there. And the fourth sign we see on the souvenir stand and the beautiful gardens in Linger Lane to take people. And we'll mount those in the same position as the camera's perspective when it was originally taken 50, 60, 70 years ago. So that's very exciting. We're super thrilled to be able to do that. And then if we have enough money left over at the end of the day, we're going to help the Historical Society with their exhibit over at the King Cottage. So we've got some things that we want to do to help support that. Funding. Where do we come from? Where do we get the funding from? Grants. We go to foundations and benefactors in the state and write compelling arguments, stories, please, and they grant us some money, and that's wonderful. Many of those grants, we also have to find a matching source of finance, so we have to come up with $1 to get $1. That's good stuff. We've got private individuals that have donated money and some local businesses, but we still need quite a bit more. We're hoping that soon we'll be able to get these signs installed. Each one of the signs is about $700. And the Jenswalls have already been kind enough to donate, so we can get one for the souvenir stand, which they're going to memorialize their grandparents with a small plaque on that sign. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much for doing that. We have something really cool. One of the people in the audience today, Don Rakuzik, and his wife and family.
Look familiar? To some of you?
Yes, made these wonderful pennants, felt pennants. This looks very much like the one we saw earlier, right, from the museum, over Chris' head there. So we have these wonderful, wonderful pennants that we would like to sell. So we have 24 of them. Don and his family were very busy, and they were able to make 24 of these. We already have 4 that are spoken for. If you'd like, yes, absolutely. If you'd like to have one, they make wonderful Christmas gifts. We'll have some available at the back of the room. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for coming tonight. Thanks to the Jenswalls. And back to you.
Okay, I think that's...
You're excusing them now?
Yeah, I think you're excused.